Olivia stared at him, her lips curling into the smallest of smirks. And too bad guilty doesn't mean untouchable. Grant's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before he tightened his grip and pushed her toward the squad car. Reynolds opened the back door and gestured with a mock bow. "After you." Olivia climbed in, her movements smooth, controlled. Her heart pounded, but her mind was already running at full speed. They made their move. Now it was my turn. The ride to the station was quiet. The only sounds were the occasional crackle of the radio and the hum of the tires on the pavement. Olivia stared out the window, her mind playing through every possible next step. She had a tracking device in her watch. Her team at the FBI would already know she was in trouble. But she needed more than just backup. She needed a way to make sure these two never walked free again. Grant pulled into the station's parking lot and yanked Olivia out of the back seat. The station was quiet, just a few officers lingering by the desks, some glancing at her, others pretending not to see. She caught one officer, a young Latino man, shifting uncomfortably as he looked between her and Grant. His nameplate read Rodriguez. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't say anything. Coward, she thought. Reynolds pushed her forward, guiding her through the hallways. They took her to a small, dimly lit room with a single table and 2 chairs. "Sit," Grant ordered. Olivia sat. Reynolds leaned against the door, arms crossed. "Now, let's talk about that little baggie we found in your car." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you mean the baggie you planted?" Grant's jaw twitched. "Watch your mouth." She leaned back in her chair. "Or what? You'll add resisting arrest to the list?" Reynolds chuckled. "Oh, you're funny." He stepped forward and placed his hands on the table. "But let me explain something to you, lady. You're in our house now. No fancy lawyer, no big government badge. Just you and us." Olivia tilted her head, looking him up and down. "You sure about that?" A knock at the door made both men flinch. A uniformed officer poked his head in. "Sarge wants to see you too." Grant cursed under his breath. "Tell him we're busy." The officer hesitated. He said now. Reynolds and Grant shared a glance. Then Grant pointed a finger at Olivia. "Don't go anywhere." She smirked. "Wouldn't dream of it." The 2 officers stormed out, leaving Olivia alone. She exhaled slowly, then turned her head slightly toward the camera in the corner of the room. She knew someone was watching. Time to speed things up. She leaned forward, carefully positioning her hands under the table where the camera wouldn't catch her movements. Then, using the edge of her chair, she pressed down on her wristwatch in a specific pattern. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more taps. It was a silent distress signal, one only a few people in the world would recognize. She hoped Daryl was one of them. Outside the room, Grant and Reynolds stormed into the sergeant's office. "What's going on?" Grant snapped. The sergeant, a bald man with a tired expression, folded his hands on the desk. "I got a call from Internal Affairs." Reynolds stiffened. "About what?" The sergeant sighed. "About her." He nodded toward the interrogation room. "They're saying she's not who she says she is." Grant laughed. "Of course, she's not. She's a drug dealer." The sergeant didn't smile. "No, they're saying she's not a criminal at all." He leaned forward. "They're saying she's an FBI agent." Silence. Reynolds and Grant stared at him. That's bullshit," Reynolds said, but his voice wavered slightly. The sergeant sighed. Maybe not. But I'm telling you right now, if she really is FBI, and you two set her up, then you are both completely screwed." Grant clenched his fists. "We need to make sure she doesn't." A new voice interrupted. Too late for that. The 3 men turned. Standing in the doorway was a tall black man in a sharp navy blue suit. His presence filled the room like a storm cloud. "My name is Jonathan Pierce," he said smoothly, stepping inside. "I'm Olivia Carter's lawyer. And you, gentlemen, just made a very, very big mistake." Grant's face turned white. Reynolds' hands balled into fists. The sergeant muttered something under his breath. Jonathan smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind that made men like Grant and Reynolds nervous. "Now," he said, adjusting his cuffs, "shall we talk about the illegal arrest you just made?" Back in the interrogation room, Olivia sat back, calmly watching the door. She knew what was coming next. Grant and Reynolds had just stepped into quicksand, and the more they struggled, the deeper they were going to sink. She just had to wait for the perfect moment to deliver the final blow. The moment came faster than she expected. The door burst open. Grant and Reynolds stormed in, their faces red with barely controlled rage. Olivia just smiled. "Welcome back," she said coolly. Grant slammed his hands on the table. "Who the hell are you?" She tilted her head. "You already know." Reynolds' jaw clenched. "You're lying. You have to be lying." Olivia slowly, deliberately, leaned forward. "You want to know the truth?" She reached into the pocket of her jumpsuit, pulling out the tiny recording device she had hidden. And then, she pressed play. "That's the one. The black girl in the suit. Pull her over. I don't care if she's done nothing. We'll find something to pin on her." Grant's own voice filled the air. His eyes went wide. Reynolds went deathly still. "And Olivia?" She just smiled. "Like I said," she whispered, "you framed the wrong person." The air in the interrogation room turned thick, heavy with the weight of the truth crashing down on officers Grant and Reynolds. Olivia watched their faces closely, memorizing every flicker of panic, every twitch of disbelief. The recording continued playing. "Just need a reason." Then, silence. Reynolds lunged for the recorder. Olivia pulled her hands back, lifting the small device just out of his reach. "You really think I'd bring the only copy here?" she asked smoothly. "Please." Grant's hands balled into fists. His face was turning red. Whether from rage or fear, Olivia couldn't tell. Probably both. The door opened again. Jonathan Pierce stepped inside, his presence filling the room like a thunderstorm rolling in. His sharp navy blue suit was crisp, his movements slow and deliberate as he set his briefcase down on the table. "Well," he said, clasping his hands together, "this is awkward." Grant whipped around. "Get her out of here," he barked at Jonathan. "She's under arrest." Jonathan held up a hand. No, she's not." He pulled a sheet of paper from his briefcase and slid it across the table. Grant snatched it up, eyes scanning the words. Olivia could already see the vein in his forehead throbbing. It was an official court order. Signed, stamped, verified. An order for Olivia's immediate release. Reynolds' mouth fell open. "No way. No way." Jonathan finished for him, flashing a smirk. He turned to Olivia. "You're free to go." Olivia calmly stood, shaking her wrists as the handcuffs were removed. She smoothed out her jumpsuit. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she leaned in toward Grant. "Thanks for the hospitality," she said. "But next time, maybe don't frame an FBI agent." Grant's nostrils flared. His jaw clenched so hard she thought he might break a tooth. Jonathan gave her a nod, signaling for them to leave. But just as Olivia reached the door, Grant's voice stopped her. "This isn't over." She turned back, raising an eyebrow. Grant's face was twisted with rage, but behind it, she saw something else. Fear. She smiled. "Oh, I know," she said. "Not for you, anyway." Then she walked out, leaving them trapped in the mess they had created. The ride home was quiet, except for the sound of Olivia's fingers tapping rhythmically against her knee. Jonathan drove, his eyes focused on the road. "You okay?" he finally asked. She exhaled. "Yeah." He glanced at her. "That was risky, Liv." She smirked. "So was pulling me over." Jonathan chuckled. "Fair point." He reached over, grabbing a thick folder from the passenger seat and handing it to her. "I got something for you." Olivia flipped it open. Inside were pages upon pages of reports, case files, complaints, witness statements. It was everything they had on Grant and Reynolds. Her smirk faded. "They've been doing this for years," Jonathan said. "Planted evidence, false arrests, and not just them. There's a whole network of dirty cops protecting each other." Olivia closed the folder. "We take them all down." Jonathan nodded. "We will." But before he could say more, his phone rang. He put it on speaker. "Jonathan Pierce," he answered. A shaky voice came through the line. "J. Jonathan?" "It's Daryl." Olivia's stomach dropped. Something was wrong. "Daryl? What's going on?" she demanded. They know." His breathing was fast, panicked. "Grant, Reynolds. Someone tipped them off that I've been helping you. Olivia's blood ran cold. They're looking for me, Daryl continued. They came to my apartment. I barely got out in time. I don't know what to do. Olivia didn't hesitate. Where are you? A bus station on 7th, he said. The line went dead. Jonathan cursed, gripping the wheel tighter. Olivia's heart pounded. They cut the call, she muttered. Jonathan was already making a sharp U-turn. We need to move. Now. The bus station was dimly lit, the yellowish glow of the street lamps barely cutting through the shadows. Olivia stepped out of the car, her heart racing. She scanned the area, searching for any sign of Daryl. Then, movement. A figure huddled near the benches, his hood pulled low. She rushed forward. Daryl. He looked up, relief washing over his face. Liv. A pair of headlights flashed in the distance. A black SUV. The doors flew open. Two figures stepped out. Grant. Reynolds. Daryl's eyes widened. They found me. Grant smirked. Oh, you're not running this time. Olivia stepped in front of her brother. Her hands curled into fists. Grant and Reynolds weren't here to arrest anyone. They were here to silence him. Jonathan stepped up beside her. Bad move, officers, he said. Reynolds pulled something from his jacket. A gun. Daryl let out a sharp breath. Olivia's entire body tensed. Reynolds smirked, his finger resting on the trigger. Let's see how tough you are now. Olivia reached for Daryl. A gunshot echoed through the air. Daryl gasped. Olivia's stomach twisted in horror. She turned. Someone had been hit. But it wasn't Daryl. It was Grant. His body staggered backward, his eyes wide with shock. Blood blossomed across his shoulder. Behind him, standing in the shadows, gun raised, was Officer Rodriguez. Olivia exhaled sharply. Rodriguez had made his choice. Reynolds turned, raising his gun toward him. Rodriguez didn't hesitate. Bang! Reynolds collapsed. The bus station fell into stunned silence. Grant groaned, clutching his bleeding shoulder. You idiot! Rodriguez stepped forward, lowering his gun. His face was pale, his hands shaking. I've seen enough. Jonathan took out his phone. I'm calling this in. Olivia turned to Daryl, gripping his shoulders. You okay? He nodded, still in shock. I think so. The sound of sirens filled the night. Backup was coming. Grant knew it was over. But before the cops could arrive, before anyone could move, he locked eyes with Olivia. And then, through gritted teeth, he whispered, This isn't the end. Olivia's eyes darkened. No, she said coldly. It's just the beginning. The sirens wailed louder as red and blue lights flooded the streets. Olivia stood still, watching as Grant clutched his bleeding shoulder, his face contorted in pain. Reynolds lay motionless beside him, barely breathing, his gun still inches from his hand. Rodriguez, the young officer who had just made his choice, swallowed hard. His hands trembled slightly as he kept his weapon trained on Grant. This is over, he said, his voice shaking but firm. Olivia glanced at Daryl, who was still frozen in shock. She reached out and gripped his arm. Stay behind me, she murmured. Jonathan Pierce stepped forward, his sharp gaze locked onto Grant. You were saying something about this not being over, he asked. His tone was casual, but his eyes burned with fury. Grant coughed, spitting blood onto the pavement. He still managed a twisted smirk. You think one bad night changes anything? He rasped. You think we're the only ones? Olivia's jaw clenched. She knew he wasn't bluffing. This wasn't just about Grant and Reynolds. It was bigger than them. And now, she had just kicked a hornet's nest. The first police cars screeched to a stop, and officers rushed out. Some pulled their guns, others hesitated, unsure of what had just happened. Rodriguez quickly raised his badge. Officer down, he called out. I fired in self-defense. A bald officer with a thick mustache stepped forward. What the hell is going on here? Jonathan took a deep breath and pulled out his phone. I suggest you call the chief, he said. Right now. The officer frowned, but did as he was told. Olivia turned back to Grant, who was being roughly hauled to his feet by two cops. His uniform was smeared with blood, his hands now cuffed. But even in his weakened state, He managed to lean in close to her as he passed. "They'll come for you," he whispered, his voice so low only she could hear. "You don't know how deep this goes." Olivia didn't blink. She didn't react. But inside, her blood ran cold. How deep does it go? She was about to find out. 2 hours later, Olivia sat across from Jonathan in his downtown office. Daryl was curled up on the couch in the corner, still shaken. Rodriguez had been taken in for questioning, but Olivia had made sure he had legal protection. After what he did, they weren't about to let him take the fall for doing the right thing. Jonathan slid a thick file across the desk toward her. "This is bigger than just Grant and Reynolds," he said. Olivia opened the file. Inside were reports, internal complaints, whistleblower statements, and names. A lot of names. She scanned the list, her stomach twisting. "It's a whole network," Jonathan continued. "Corrupt officers, judges, even a few politicians. They've been running this operation for years, planting evidence, making false arrests, extorting money. And anyone who speaks out, they disappear," Olivia finished. Jonathan nodded grimly. "Or they end up in prison, framed for crimes they didn't commit." Daryl sat up. "So what do we do?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Olivia exhaled. "We take them down." Jonathan's lips curled into a smirk. "I was hoping you'd say that." The next few days were a blur. Olivia, Jonathan, and a handful of trusted FBI agents began digging deep. Every file, every report, every complaint against Grant and his associates was brought into the light. It was a monster of a case, and the deeper they dug, the darker it got. Dozens of innocent people had been framed, their lives destroyed. Some were still in prison. Others had vanished without a trace. And worst of all, the corruption stretched far beyond the police department. Judges were involved, lawyers, business owners, people with power. This wasn't just about crooked cops. This was a criminal empire. And Olivia? She had just put herself right in the center of it. 3 nights later, Olivia sat in her apartment, reviewing the latest reports. The walls were covered in notes, strings of connections linking names and events together. Her phone buzzed. A restricted number. She hesitated before answering. "Agent Carter," a distorted voice said. Her spine straightened. "Who is this?" she asked. A low chuckle. "Someone who wants to give you some friendly advice." Olivia's fingers tightened around the phone. "That's so?" "You're making a lot of noise, Agent," the voice continued. "Poking around places you shouldn't." Her heartbeat quickened, but she kept her voice calm. And you might want to stop before you end up like the others." A cold silence stretched between them. Olivia leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "See, that's the thing," she said slowly. "I don't scare easy." Another chuckle. This time, it was almost amused. "We'll see about that." Then the line went dead. Olivia stared at the phone. She was running out of time. Whoever was behind this, whoever was truly pulling the strings, was watching her. And they were about to make their move. The next night, Olivia sat in her car, parked outside an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. She checked her gun, making sure it was loaded. Daryl had managed to track down an informant, someone who used to work inside the operation, someone who wanted out. She was supposed to meet him here. Jonathan had insisted on coming, but Olivia had told him to stay back. This was personal. She stepped out of the car and moved toward the warehouse entrance. The air smelled of oil and rust. The wind howled through broken windows. A shadow moved inside. She placed her hand on her weapon but didn't draw it yet. "Hello?" she called out. A figure stepped forward, a middle-aged man with graying hair and tired eyes. He looked over his shoulder before speaking. "You Carter?" he asked. She nodded. "You got something for me?" He exhaled. "Yeah, but you're not gonna like it." She stepped closer. "Talk." The man licked his lips. "You think Grant was the boss?" He shook his head. "He's nothing. Just a pawn." Olivia tensed. "Then who's running things?" The man's eyes darted around, as if he was afraid someone was watching. And maybe they were. Finally, he whispered 2 words that made Olivia's blood freeze. "Police chief." Before Olivia could respond, a gunshot rang out. The man's body jerked. Blood sprayed onto the concrete. Olivia dove behind a crate as another shot hit the ground where she had just been standing. A sniper. The informant collapsed to the ground, his eyes wide in shock. She didn't have time to mourn. Footsteps pounded against the pavement. More men, coming for her. She gritted her teeth, pulled out her gun, and prepared for a fight. They wanted war? They just got one. Gunfire erupted from the shadows. Olivia hit the ground, rolling behind a rusted crate just as bullets shattered the concrete where she'd been standing. She pressed her back against the crate, breathing fast, her mind racing. A sniper, and more men on foot. They hadn't come to scare her. They'd come to eliminate her. She gritted her teeth, gripped her gun, and waited for the next shot. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. The moment she heard a footstep close in, she swung out from behind the crate and fired. Bang! A man in black, tactical gear stumbled back, clutching his shoulder. Another lunged forward, raising his weapon. Bang! Bang! She dropped him before he could pull the trigger. But she was still pinned down. The sniper was still out there, and she had no idea where. Her mind raced. I need to move. Need to get out of here. She turned her head slightly, her eyes locking on a broken window 10 feet away. It's a risk, but it's my only shot. She inhaled sharply. Then, move. She sprang up, sprinting toward the window just as another bullet whizzed past her ear. She dived forward, crashing through the shattered glass, landing hard on the gravel outside. Pain exploded through her ribs, but she ignored it, scrambling to her feet and running for cover. She could hear them shouting behind her. They weren't giving up, but neither was she. Olivia ran through the empty lot, ducking behind abandoned cars and stacks of wooden pallets. She reached for her phone, then cursed. It was gone. Must have fallen when she crashed through the window. She was alone. No backup. No way to call for help. She needed to disappear. Fast. She spotted a sewer grate near the edge of the lot. The opening was small, but she could fit if she forced herself. No time to hesitate. She dropped to the ground, yanked the grate loose, and slipped inside. The metal scraped her skin as she slid into the darkness. Seconds later, footsteps thundered above her. She was just here. Find her. The boss wants this done tonight. She held her breath, pressing herself against the damp concrete walls. She could hear them moving, searching. One wrong sound, one wrong movement, and she was dead. Then, a voice. One she recognized instantly. Grant. Even though she couldn't see him, she knew he was standing just feet above her, his voice dripping with anger. She's not getting away, he snarled. Search every inch of this place. His men spread out. Olivia gritted her teeth. You just made your last mistake, Grant. She wasn't running anymore. She was coming for them. By the time Olivia crawled out of the sewer a mile away, she was exhausted, filthy, and pissed. She had barely made it out alive. But now she had confirmation. Grant was working for someone bigger. And if the police chief was involved, then this wasn't just about dirty cops. This was about complete control over the city. She needed backup. Now, she walked down a dimly lit street, moving fast but keeping her head low. She needed to get to Jonathan before they realized she was still alive. 30 minutes later, Olivia banged on the door of Jonathan's office. He answered almost immediately, his eyes widening when he saw her. Jesus, Liv? She pushed past him, locking the door behind her. No time. Jonathan shut his briefcase, concern written all over his face. What happened? She didn't sit. She couldn't. They tried to kill me, she said bluntly. Jonathan's jaw tightened. She tossed the blood-stained file onto his desk. Our informant? Dead. Sniper took him out. I barely got away. Jonathan ran a hand over his face. You need to lay low. No. Olivia snapped. I need to end this. Jonathan sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. He opened a drawer, pulled out another file, and slid it toward her. You were right, he said grimly. The police chief isn't just involved. He's running the whole damn operation. Olivia clenched her fists. His name is Chief Howard Graves, Jonathan continued. On the surface, he's a respected officer. But underneath? He gestured toward the file. Bribes. Drug trafficking. Money laundering. He's got politicians, businessmen, even other cops in his pocket. And he's untouchable. Olivia's blood boiled. You know what that means? Jonathan said. She nodded, gripping the file tightly. It meant she had to burn it all down. But just as she was about to speak, Jonathan's phone rang. Restricted number. They exchanged a look. Then he answered. Jonathan Pierce. A long pause. Then, a voice. Low, cold, dangerous. I warned her. Olivia stiffened. Jonathan's hand tightened around the phone. Who is this? The voice chuckled. You keep digging, and you'll bury yourselves. Then, bang. The windows shattered as bullets tore through the office. Jonathan tackled Olivia to the ground just as another round of gunfire ripped through the walls. Move! Move! He shouted. They crawled toward the back exit, glass raining down around them. The gunfire didn't stop. This wasn't a warning. This was an execution. They barely made it to the alley before the entire front office exploded in flames. The force of the blast threw Olivia forward, her ears ringing. She hit the pavement hard, gasping for air. Jonathan groaned beside her, struggling to sit up. Their office, their files, everything, gone. Olivia pushed herself up, staring at the burning wreckage. Her hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just a cover-up. This was war. She turned to Jonathan, her eyes blazing with fury. They just made the biggest mistake of their lives. He exhaled sharply. What now? Olivia stared into the flames, her heart pounding. We take down Chief Graves. Jonathan nodded. And how do we do that? Olivia turned to him, her expression cold and sharp as a knife. We make him confess, she said. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. And if he doesn't? A slow, dangerous smile spread across Olivia's lips. Then we burn everything he's built to the ground. The smoke curled into the night sky, black and thick, a burning reminder that Olivia Carter had just lost everything. Her files, her office, and any illusion that the people behind this weren't willing to kill her. She and Jonathan crouched in the shadows of a nearby alley, catching their breath. Sirens wailed in the distance, closing in fast. They couldn't stay here. Jonathan wiped the blood from his forehead, wincing. They didn't just try to scare us this time, Liv. I know, Olivia said, her voice tight. Jonathan turned to her. They're done playing games. So am I. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small flash drive. Jonathan's eyes widened. You got something? She nodded. Before I left my apartment, I copied every piece of evidence I had onto this. She tucked it safely inside her jacket. They can burn my office to the ground, but they can't erase the truth. Jonathan ran a hand over his face. Okay, what's the plan? Olivia's jaw tightened. We're going after Chief Graves. Jonathan exhaled. You want to take down the most powerful man in the city? No, she corrected. I want to make him beg for mercy. They couldn't go back to Olivia's apartment. It wasn't safe. Instead, they drove to an old safe house on the outskirts of town, an abandoned warehouse Olivia had used on past undercover cases. Jonathan parked the car behind the building, and they slipped inside. Daryl was already there, pacing anxiously. When he saw Olivia, his face flooded with relief. Liv. He rushed forward, gripping her arms. Are you okay? I saw what happened on the news. Olivia gave him a firm nod. I'm fine. Daryl shook his head. No, you're not. This is getting too dangerous. She cut him off. I don't have a choice. Daryl exhaled sharply. They will kill you. Let them try. Jonathan stepped in. We don't have time to argue. The deeper we go, the more dangerous this gets. But if we don't stop Chief Graves now, no one will. Daryl rubbed his face, then sighed in defeat. Fine. What's the plan? Olivia pulled out the flash drive and plugged it into a laptop. We have evidence, but not enough to convict. Graves has too many people protecting him. She tapped the screen. We need a confession. Jonathan frowned. And how do you suggest we get one? A slow, deadly smile spread across Olivia's face. We make him think he's already lost. That night, Olivia made a call. A direct line to the police chief's private office. It rang 3 times before a voice answered. Who is this? Chief Howard Graves' voice was deep, smooth, like a man who had spent years perfecting his mask of authority. Olivia leaned against the warehouse desk, her fingers drumming against the wood. "You know exactly who I am." A pause, then a quiet chuckle. "Agent Carter." Surprised? Not at all. His voice was calm, too calm. "I heard about your little accident." Olivia smirked. "You mean the explosion?" "Yeah. Didn't work." Graves sighed. "I was hoping you'd take the hint and walk away." "Funny. I was hoping you'd be smarter than Grant and Reynolds. But I guess I was wrong." Silence. Then Graves' voice lowered. "You don't know who you're messing with." Olivia's smile never faded. "No, Chief. You don't." She hit a button on her laptop, sending a file directly to his email. "Check your inbox." A moment of silence. Then, Olivia heard a faint click as he opened the file. "What is this?" "Evidence," she said smoothly. "Every crooked deal, every false arrest, every life you've destroyed. You've been sloppy, Chief. And now? The whole city is about to see the truth." Graves' breathing changed. "You're bluffing." Olivia leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Then why are you sweating?" Another long pause. Then Graves let out a quiet chuckle. "You think this is enough to stop me?" "I think it's enough to make the right people start asking questions." Graves hummed in amusement. "Even if you take me down, someone else will take my place." Olivia smiled. "Then I'll take them down too." A beat of silence. Then, "I'm going to enjoy watching you suffer, Agent Carter." Olivia's smile faded. "Funny," she said. "I was just about to say the same thing." Then she hung up. Jonathan stared at her. What the hell was that? Olivia shut the laptop. That was step one. Daryl crossed his arms. And step two? She turned to them, her eyes sharp as steel. "We turn his own people against him." 2 days later, Olivia's plan was in motion. She and Jonathan had sent pieces of the evidence to trusted journalists, attorneys, and even a few honest cops inside the department. And now, Graves was trapped. His own officers were questioning their loyalty. The public was whispering about corruption at the highest level. He was losing control, but Olivia knew he wouldn't go down quietly, which is why she was ready when the trap finally sprung. At exactly midnight, an unmarked black car pulled up outside the warehouse. Olivia stood at the window, watching as 2 men stepped out. Jonathan stood beside her. "Think he took the bait?" Olivia exhaled. "We're about to find out." The door opened, and Rodriguez stepped inside. The young officer looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder before facing Olivia. "They know what you're doing," he said. "Graves is sending men after you. Tonight." Jonathan cursed. "We don't have time to move." Rodriguez's jaw tightened. "There's something else. Grant. He cut a deal." Olivia's body went stiff. "What kind of deal?" Rodriguez swallowed. "He's meeting with Graves in 2 hours. If you want that confession." He exhaled sharply. "That's your only shot." Olivia's pulse pounded. This was it. Their only chance. She grabbed her gun and checked the magazine. "Then let's go." Jonathan shook his head. "Liv, this is suicide. We can't just walk into that meeting." She turned to him. "Who said anything about walking?" Jonathan frowned. "Then what's the plan?" Olivia's smile was ice cold. "We crashed the party." The city lights blurred past as Olivia gripped the wheel, her fingers tight around the leather. The black SUV moved smoothly through the streets, but inside, tension coiled like a snake ready to strike. Jonathan sat beside her, checking his gun. In the back seat, Rodriguez and Daryl exchanged uneasy glances. "Are we really doing this?" Daryl asked, his voice low. Olivia didn't take her eyes off the road. "There's no turning back now." Rodriguez sighed, rubbing his temple. "You know this is insane, right?" "Completely." Jonathan leaned forward. "But it's our only shot." Rodriguez exhaled sharply. "Fine. Then let's not get ourselves killed." The meeting was happening at a secluded warehouse on the docks. Olivia parked the SUV a few blocks away. They stepped out, crouching behind an old truck as they surveyed the area. 2 black Escalades sat outside the warehouse, engines still running. A handful of men stood near the entrance, smoking cigarettes and checking their weapons. Inside that building, Grant and Chief Graves were about to have a conversation, and Olivia was going to make sure the whole world heard it. Jonathan glanced at her. You sure about this? She pulled a small recording device from her jacket. This doesn't work. We take them down the hard way. Daryl frowned. And what's the hard way? Olivia chambered a round in her pistol. Exactly what it sounds like. Jonathan smirked. I like this plan. Rodriguez sighed. I hate this plan. Good, Olivia said. That means it'll work. They moved through the shadows, avoiding the guards. Rodriguez had provided them with blueprints of the building. There was an old skylight on the roof. If they could reach it, Olivia could drop a recording device inside before slipping back out. Simple. In theory, they climbed up the side of a rusty fire escape, reaching the roof in silence. Olivia peered through the skylight. Inside, Chief Graves sat at a large metal table, his expression cold and unreadable. Grant sat across from him, looking anxious, his bandaged shoulders still healing from the bullet he took. A briefcase sat between them. A payoff. Olivia clicked on her recording device. Showtime. She carefully lowered the small device through the open crack of the skylight, making sure it was hidden in the rafters. Then, they listened. Inside, Graves folded his hands, his voice calm. You've been sloppy, Grant. Grant swallowed hard. I did what I had to. You told me to keep things under control. Graves exhaled, tapping his fingers against the table. And now we have an FBI agent sniffing around. Not to mention the media breathing down our necks. Grant licked his lips. I can fix this. Graves smiled, but there was no warmth in it. No, you can't. Then, without warning, bang. Grant's body jerked backward. Blood sprayed across the table. Jonathan clenched his teeth. Jesus. Rodriguez swore under his breath. Holy. Daryl turned away, his face pale. Grant gurgled, his mouth opening and closing as he slumped forward, unmoving. Graves wiped a speck of blood from his sleeve and sighed. That's the problem with rats, he muttered. They always think they're smarter than the snake. Olivia's grip tightened around the ledge. We need to go. She reached for the recording device. Crack. The old skylight groaned beneath her weight. Then, it shattered. Olivia fell. The world spun. Glass rained down. She hit the metal table with a brutal thud, rolling off onto the floor. Pain exploded through her ribs, but she forced herself to move. Graves' men were already reaching for their weapons. Jonathan, Rodriguez, and Daryl were shouting from above. She had seconds to act. Olivia grabbed the nearest chair and swung it hard into the face of a guard. Crack. He crumpled to the ground. She lunged for cover just as bullets sprayed past her, ricocheting off the metal walls. Graves stood, his eyes narrowed. Well, he mused. Agent Carter. Olivia exhaled sharply, pressing her back against a crate. Nice to finally meet you. Graves smirked. You should have stayed out of this. She reached into her jacket, pulling out her backup gun. That's funny, she said, because I was just thinking the same thing about you. Graves chuckled. You're surrounded, Agent. There's no way out. She clicked the safety off her gun. Then I guess we do this the hard way. Jonathan's voice crackled through her earpiece. Liv, we're coming in hot. She smiled. Good, she said. Then she stepped out and started shooting. The warehouse erupted in chaos. Jonathan and Rodriguez crashed through the entrance, guns blazing. Daryl threw a smoke grenade, blinding the guards. Olivia ducked and rolled behind a stack of crates, taking out 2 men before they even knew what hit them. Graves moved through the smoke, disappearing into the back office. Coward. Olivia sprinted after him. She kicked open the door, gun raised. Graves stood behind his desk, completely calm. She stepped forward, keeping her aim steady. It's over, Graves. He smirked. No, Agent Carter. It's just beginning. He pressed a button on his desk. A hidden door slid open. Behind it, a tunnel. Graves bolted. Olivia cursed and ran after him. She chased him through the tunnel, her breath ragged. Graves was fast, but Olivia was faster. She tackled him from behind, sending them both crashing to the ground. He struggled, throwing a wild punch. She dodged and slammed her elbow into his face. Bam! He groaned, blood dripping from his nose. She pinned him down, twisting his arms behind his back. "Where do you think you're going?" she growled. Graves laughed, despite the pain. "You really think arresting me will change anything?" Olivia leaned in close. "I don't need to arrest you," she whispered. "I just need the whole world to hear what you just did." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. The call was still recording. Jonathan's voice echoed from the speaker. "We got it, Liv." Graves' face paled. His confession, the gunshot, everything, broadcasted to the entire city. Olivia smirked. "Smile for the cameras, Chief." Sirens wailed outside. The truth was out, and Chief Howard Graves was done. The sirens grew louder, the sound bouncing off the metal walls of the tunnel. Olivia kept her knee pressed against Chief Graves' back, making sure he had no chance of slipping away. Blood dripped from his nose onto the cold concrete, but he didn't struggle anymore. He knew it was over. Jonathan, Rodriguez, and Daryl appeared at the mouth of the tunnel, guns still raised. "We got him?" Jonathan asked, breathing hard. Olivia nodded. "Yeah, we got him." Rodriguez exhaled, lowering his weapon. "Damn." Daryl, still catching his breath, stared down at the disgraced police chief. "That's the guy who's been ruining lives?" Olivia smirked. "Doesn't look so powerful now, does he?" Graves chuckled, his voice weak but still dripping with arrogance. "You think this changes anything?" Olivia pressed down harder on his back, making him groan in pain. "I think you're done talking." Jonathan pulled out his phone, checking the live feed. The entire city heard that confession, Liv. Every word. Olivia grinned. "Good." Outside, police cars screeched to a stop. Doors flew open. Officers swarmed the area. But this time, it wasn't Graves' men. It was the ones who weren't on his payroll. Chief Graves, the untouchable king of corruption, was now just another criminal. And Olivia? She had just flipped the whole city upside down. The moment they stepped out of the tunnel, a swarm of officers surrounded them. "Hands where we can see them." Jonathan quickly raised his badge. "Relax, gentlemen. We're the good guys." The lead officer, a tall black man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense stance, stepped forward. Captain Russell, one of the few honest cops left in the city. Russell took one look at Graves, then at Olivia. "Well, damn," he muttered. "You actually did it." Olivia smirked. "Of course I did." Russell motioned to his men. "Cuff him." One of the officers yanked Graves to his feet and slapped a pair of handcuffs around his wrists. "Howard Graves," Russell said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're under arrest for corruption, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and the attempted murder of a federal agent." Graves sneered. "You don't know what you're doing." Russell stepped in close, his voice calm but firm. "No, you didn't know what you were doing." He turned to Olivia. "You sure you got everything on him?" Olivia pulled out her phone and waved it. "Every single word." Russell nodded. "Then I guess we're done here." They hauled Graves toward the police car. Olivia watched as the man who once controlled everything was shoved into the back seat. And for the first time in years, the city could finally breathe. Hours later, Olivia sat in Jonathan's office, sipping a glass of whiskey. The news was already everywhere. Breaking news. Police chief exposed in shocking FBI sting. Corruption ring collapses. Multiple arrests made. FBI agent Olivia Carter takes down city's most powerful criminal. Jonathan grinned, tossing a newspaper onto the desk. "They're calling you a hero." Olivia snorted. "They'll change their minds in a week." Daryl sat on the couch, shaking his head. "I still can't believe it." Graves then cuffs. The whole damn city watching. Rodriguez leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Yeah, well, not everyone's happy." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Rodriguez sighed. "We took out the head of the snake, but there are still plenty of his people out there. Cops, politicians, even some business owners. They're scared. Desperate." Jonathan nodded. "And desperate people make dangerous moves." Olivia rolled her shoulders. "Let them come." Jonathan chuckled. "You never know when to quit, do you?" She smirked. "Nope." Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Olivia hesitated. Then she answered. Silence on the other end. Then, a slow, steady breath. And a voice. You really think this is over? Olivia's grip tightened on the phone. Who is this? The voice chuckled. You got rid of Graves, the man said. But there's always another king waiting to take the throne. A chill ran down Olivia's spine. Who are you? She demanded. The man ignored the question. Watch your back, Agent Carter, he murmured. The game isn't over. Then the line went dead. Olivia lowered the phone, her heartbeat steady. Jonathan frowned. Bad news. She set the phone down. Looks like we just made some new enemies. Daryl groaned. Of course we did. Rodriguez cracked his knuckles. Then I guess we're not done yet. Olivia exhaled, staring out the window. Graves was gone, but the war wasn't over. Someone was still pulling the strings. And if they thought she was going to walk away now, they didn't know Olivia Carter. She smiled to herself. Time to find out who was really running the city. The phone call had left Olivia unsettled, but she wasn't about to let it show. Not now. Not when they had just taken down one of the most dangerous criminals the city had ever known. Graves might be in custody, but something in her gut told her this wasn't the end of the fight. It never was. Jonathan noticed her silence as he watched her stare out of the window, lost in thought. Who do you think that was? He asked, breaking the quiet. Olivia exhaled sharply, shaking her head. I don't know. But whoever they are, they've been watching. Rodriguez stood from the corner where he'd been leaning. You think it's another cop? Olivia narrowed her eyes. Could be. Or someone even higher up the ladder. Daryl looked between them, still trying to wrap his mind around everything that had happened. So what do we do now? We've taken down Graves. We've got the evidence. I mean, isn't that enough? Not when there's someone else pulling the strings, Olivia replied. Graves might have been the head, but there's always someone behind the scenes, controlling things. We've only seen the tip of the iceberg. Jonathan poured himself another drink, watching Olivia carefully. You want to go after them? Olivia turned to face him, her expression hardening. Of course I do. This city is riddled with corruption, and I'm not letting anyone get away with it. Rodriguez shook his head. You just took down a guy who had his hands in every criminal operation in the city. And now you're saying it's not over? Olivia met his gaze. No, it's far from over. But we need to be smart about this. We need to find out who's still out there before they make their move. Jonathan finished his drink and set the glass down on the desk. Then we dig deeper. We start tracking the money, the connections. Graves didn't do all this by himself. Olivia nodded. Exactly. But we also need to be careful. Whoever this is, they know how to hide in the shadows. They're not going to make themselves easy targets. Daryl clenched his fists. So we're going to hunt them down? Olivia stood up, her eyes locking on his. Yes, but we do it smart. No more rushing in. We get the facts, we follow the trail, and we make them come to us. Rodriguez looked skeptical, but he said nothing. He had seen Olivia take down criminals before, and he knew that when she set her mind on something, she wouldn't stop until it was done. The next few days were a blur of research and investigation. Olivia, Jonathan, Rodriguez, and Daryl worked tirelessly, digging through documents, tracking money flows, and interviewing anyone who might know something about the city's underbelly. The deeper they went, the more they realized that Graves had been only one piece of a much larger puzzle. Late one night, Jonathan and Olivia sat together in the office, staring at a map of the city. We're getting closer, Jonathan said, pointing at a series of connections on the map. These properties here, they're all linked to shell companies. And this one, he said, pointing to a property near the docks, is linked to some big names in the criminal world. Olivia leaned in, studying the map. This is where we start. Rodriguez and Daryl arrived a little while later, both looking exhausted but determined. Any progress? Rodriguez asked, wiping his brow. Olivia glanced up from the map. We've got a lead. There's a warehouse near the docks. Seems to be where some of the higher-ups are hiding out. We'll need to check it out. Jonathan grabbed his jacket. I'll drive. Rodriguez frowned. We're not going in hot this time, are we? Olivia shook her head. No, we're going to observe. We'll make our move once we know who's inside and what they're up to. Daryl crossed his arms, looking skeptical. And if we don't have time to wait? Olivia met his gaze. Then we improvise. The night air was thick with tension as they drove toward the docks. The warehouse loomed in the distance, its large, dark silhouette barely visible under the moonlight. Olivia's eyes were fixed on it, her mind racing with possibilities. Whoever was inside that warehouse was about to meet the same fate as Graves. They parked a few blocks away, keeping to the shadows. Olivia pulled out binoculars and started scanning the area. I don't see anyone yet. It looks quiet. Jonathan scanned the street through the window of the car. There's gotta be someone inside. Rodriguez checked his watch. We've been here for 20 minutes. I'm starting to feel like we're chasing ghosts. Olivia didn't respond. Her eyes remained trained on the warehouse. Then, a figure emerged from the building. Olivia's pulse quickened as she recognized the man. It was Victor Cain, a known associate of Graves. Rodriguez, you know this guy? Olivia asked, her voice low. Rodriguez nodded. Yeah, I've seen him around. He's dangerous, but he's not a big player. Not like Graves. Olivia didn't take her eyes off him. Maybe not, but he knows something. And I'm not letting him walk away. Jonathan's eyes flicked to Olivia. We move now? She hesitated. Cain was walking toward a black car parked across the street. Olivia's fingers tightened around her gun. She knew they couldn't wait much longer. The moment he got into that car, he'd disappear. We go now, she said. Without waiting for a response, Olivia opened the door and moved swiftly through the shadows. Jonathan, Rodriguez, and Daryl followed close behind. Cain reached the car and was just about to open the door when Olivia stepped out of the darkness, her gun raised. Victor Cain, she said, her voice cutting through the night air. I need to talk to you. Cain froze, his hands still on the door handle. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. What the hell is this? You think you can just walk up and... Before he could finish, Olivia was on him, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back. I think you're going to tell me everything you know about Graves' operation, she said. Cain grunted in pain. You're crazy if you think I'm talking to you. Olivia shoved him against the car, keeping her gun trained on him. I don't think you understand. This is your only shot to make it out of this alive. Cain laughed bitterly. You think Graves is the only one in control? Olivia's eyes narrowed. Who else is there? Cain grinned, his teeth flashing in the dim light. I'll tell you everything, but you're gonna have to make it worth my while. Olivia leaned in close, her voice cold. Tell me what I need to know, or I'll make sure you never see the light of day again. Cain hesitated, then sighed. Graves wasn't the top dog. I just worked for him. But I know who's really pulling the strings. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. Who? Cain leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. The mayor. The words hit Olivia like a punch to the gut. The mayor, she repeated, her voice cold and sharp. Cain's grin widened, but there was a flicker of fear in his eyes now. He could feel the weight of Olivia's gun pressed against his side, and it wasn't the same arrogant confidence he had a few moments ago. Yeah, he said, lowering his voice. The mayor's got ties to everything. He's been running the show from behind the curtain for years. Graves was just his muscle. Olivia's mind raced. All this time, she had been focused on taking down Graves, and now she was learning the truth. Graves was just a pawn in a much bigger game. The mayor? The mayor was behind all of this. Rodriguez stepped forward, his brow furrowed. You're saying the mayor's part of this whole criminal operation? That's huge. Cain nodded, his gaze flicking nervously between Olivia and the others. You think I'm lying? The mayor's been using the city's resources, controlling the police force, the drug trade, even real estate deals, everything. I'm just a small piece of the puzzle, but he's the one holding it all together. Jonathan clenched his jaw, his anger barely contained. How do we get to him? If he's really running the city, he's got to be untouchable. Olivia's grip tightened on her gun. Not for long, but we need proof. And Cain, she pulled him back from the car and shoved him into the alley. You're going to help us get it? Cain's face twisted in frustration. You think I'm going to take down the mayor for you? He'll have me killed in a heartbeat. Olivia's voice was icy. You'll talk, or I'll make sure that every single piece of evidence I have about your involvement with Graves gets sent straight to the press. Everyone will know your name. You'll be buried." Cain swallowed hard, his bravado slipping away. He looked at Olivia, then glanced at the others. Finally, he spoke. "Fine," he said reluctantly, "but you have to promise me protection. I don't want to end up like Graves." Olivia stared him down. "You help us bring him down, and we'll make sure you get a chance at a deal. But you make one wrong move, Cain, and I will make you regret it." Cain nodded quickly, too afraid to argue. "Okay, I'll tell you everything." Cain led them to a safe house he had used in the past, a run-down apartment on the edge of the city. It wasn't much, but it was out of the public eye. Inside, Cain pulled a manila envelope from under a couch cushion and handed it to Olivia. She flipped it open, pulling out several documents. The first one she saw was a list of payments. "These are from the mayor's office," Cain explained, his voice quieter now. "The mayor's been funneling money through shell companies, paying off cops, lawyers, even a few judges. This one," he said, pointing to a name at the top, "is where it all leads." "A meeting that was supposed to happen next week?" Olivia scanned the document quickly. "A meeting with the mayor?" Cain nodded. "Yeah. The mayor's been meeting with the city's most powerful criminals for years. But this one's the big one. He's planning something that'll make him untouchable." Jonathan leaned over her shoulder, his eyes narrowing as he read the names on the paper. "This is huge, Liv. If we can get this to the right people—" "No," Olivia said firmly, cutting him off. "This stays between us for now. We don't move until we know exactly where and when this meeting is happening. Cain, you're going to help us set up surveillance on this. If we can get the mayor to speak about what's really going on, it'll be over for him. No one's going to protect him anymore." Cain hesitated, but then nodded. "All right, I'll help you." "Good," Olivia said, her eyes hardening. "Now we need a way in." For the next 2 days, they worked quietly, tracking the mayor's movements, studying his schedule, and gathering more intel from Cain. The documents he provided were crucial: contracts, emails, and confidential records that tied the mayor directly to criminal enterprises across the city. They built a case against him piece by piece, each revelation more damning than the last. But they still needed to confirm one thing. When and where would this meeting happen? Rodriguez came to Olivia one evening with a breakthrough. "I've got it," he said, a glint of triumph in his eyes. "The mayor's got a secret penthouse. It's been under construction for a while, but it's finished now. He's scheduled to meet there in 2 days with some high-level figures." Jonathan stood up, rubbing his chin. The courtroom was silent. Not the kind of silence where people were calm, but the kind that came before a bomb exploded. The judge had just asked Officer Grant to explain why his department had arrested Olivia Carter. The officer, a tall, broad-shouldered white man, wiped his forehead and adjusted his uniform. His partner, Officer Reynolds, sat beside him, staring straight ahead like a statue. "We found drugs in her car, Your Honor," Officer Grant said. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly. The prosecutor nodded and stood up, flipping through some papers. "Miss Carter," he said, turning toward the woman in the orange jumpsuit, "do you have anything to say in your defense?" The woman in handcuffs lifted her head. She had deep brown skin and eyes that burned with a quiet fire. Her expression was calm, almost too calm for someone facing 10 years in prison. She took a deep breath and then, in a voice clear enough to shake the walls, she said, "I am a special agent of the FBI." A gasp swept through the courtroom like a sudden wind. Officer Grant's face went pale. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The judge leaned forward, his brows furrowed in shock. The prosecutor blinked. I'm sorry, what?" Olivia smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Only cold, sharp steel. "I said, I work for the Federal Bureau of Investigation." She turned her head slightly toward the officers. "And you two just made the biggest mistake of your lives." For the first time, fear flickered in Grant's eyes. His mouth opened and closed, searching for words. The room filled with murmurs. Journalists in the back frantically scribbled notes. The judge pounded his gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" Olivia looked toward her lawyer, a sharp-eyed black man in a navy blue suit. He grinned as he slid a thick folder across the table. "In this file," he said, tapping the cover, "we have evidence proving that not only did these officers plant drugs in my client's car, but they have done this to over a dozen black men and women before her. And now, we have the proof to expose them." The prosecutor's face turned red. He shuffled through his notes, flipping pages too fast, like a man drowning and reaching for air. Officer Grant stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly. "This is insane. She's lying. She—" Before he could finish, Olivia pulled something out of her jumpsuit pocket. A small, sleek recording device. She pressed play. "That's the one. The black girl in the suit. Pull her over. I don't care if she's done nothing. We'll find something to pin on her." Officer Grant's own voice filled the courtroom. It was crackly, but clear enough for everyone to hear. The room erupted. A woman in the back gasped so loud it echoed. Reporters whispered frantically into their phones. One of the jurors, an older black man, folded his arms and nodded, as if he'd seen this coming all along. Grant's hands clenched into fists. His whole body was shaking now. Olivia leaned forward, her eyes locked onto his. "You framed the wrong person," she said, her voice quiet but sharp enough to cut. The courtroom was a hurricane of voices, but Olivia just sat there, watching as the two officers began to crumble right in front of her. 2 months earlier, the sky was gray when Olivia Carter pulled up to the old diner on the corner of 14th Street. She checked her phone one last time before stepping out of her black sedan. The text message was still on the screen. "Meet me at Joe's Diner. 10 p.m. We need to talk." It was from Daryl, her younger brother. She tucked her phone into her pocket and stepped inside. The place smelled like coffee and fried eggs, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes. A jukebox in the corner played an old blues song, and a few late-night customers sat at the booths, sipping coffee or staring at their plates. Daryl sat at the far end of the diner, his hoodie pulled up over his head. His knee bounced nervously under the table. Olivia slid into the booth across from him. "What's going on?" she asked. Daryl glanced around, making sure no one was listening. Then he leaned in close. "It's about the cops," he whispered. Olivia's stomach tightened. "What about them?" she asked. He swallowed hard. "They're dirty, Liv. All of them." She frowned. "You mean all the cops?" "No, but there are some bad ones. Real bad ones." He wiped his hands on his jeans. "My friend Marcus? They framed him. Planted drugs in his car. He's locked up right now. And I heard they've done this before." Olivia took a deep breath, trying to keep her expression calm. As an FBI agent, she knew corruption in the police force wasn't new. But if what Daryl was saying was true, it meant innocent people were being locked up, and nobody was stopping it. "Who?" she asked. "Who's behind this?" Daryl hesitated. Then, he whispered 2 names. Officer Grant. Officer Reynolds. Olivia's hands tightened into fists. She knew those names. She'd seen them in reports before. And now, they were framing people in her own city? She looked at Daryl. "I need proof," she said. He nodded. "I can get it. But you gotta be careful, Liv. These guys, they don't play fair." A chill ran down Olivia's spine. She knew that all too well. It started small. A few weeks of quiet observation. Olivia, dressed in casual clothes, would sit in her car across from the police station, watching. She'd see Grant and Reynolds laughing as they walked to their cruiser, stopping only to harass a black teenager standing too close to the curb. She followed them on their shifts, watching as they pulled over cars for no reason, patting down drivers without cause. She noted every move, every illegal stop. And then, one night, she got the break she needed. She had planted a small recording device inside Grant's squad car earlier that day. When she played it back later that night, she heard everything. "Yo, that chick in the suit? The black one? She's been watching us. She's asking for it. We can take care of it. Just need a reason." Olivia's hands clenched into fists. They were talking about her. She knew what was coming. They were going to set her up. She just didn't know how soon it would happen. And she wasn't ready for how far they were willing to go. The flashing red and blue lights filled her rearview mirror. Olivia was driving home late from work when the sirens blared behind her. She pulled over, gripping the wheel as she watched the 2 officers step out of the car. Grant and Reynolds. She kept her face neutral as they approached. License and registration, Grant said, his voice sharp. She handed them over without a word. Reynolds leaned into the window, smirking. You in a hurry, ma'am? No, she said calmly. Grant walked around to the back of her car. A moment later, he called out, Well, 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 what do we have here? Olivia turned to see him holding up a small plastic bag filled with white powder. Reynolds shook his head. Ma'am, I think we need to have a talk downtown. Olivia's jaw tightened. She knew this was it. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. And soon, the whole world was going to know. The metal handcuffs snapped around Olivia's wrists, cold and unyielding. She kept her face blank, showing no fear, no anger. She had been trained for situations like this, though she never thought she'd find herself in one. Grant smirked as he yanked her up by her arm. You must think you're real smart, huh? He muttered under his breath. Too bad smart doesn't mean innocent. A penthouse, huh? Sounds like a place for a real private conversation. Olivia nodded. Exactly. This is our chance to get everything on tape. We can't afford to mess this up. Cain stepped forward. If you're going in, you'll need more than just a good plan. You'll need eyes and ears inside. I'll get you that. Olivia's brow furrowed. How? Cain grinned. I've got connections. People who can get you inside that penthouse. The night before the meeting, Olivia, Jonathan, Rodriguez, and Daryl gathered in the safe house. They had all the intel they needed. This is it, Olivia said, checking her gun one last time. Tomorrow, we take down the mayor. Daryl looked nervous. You sure we can get in without being caught? Olivia smirked. We've been doing this for months now. We know how to move in the shadows. Rodriguez shook his head, still uneasy. This is going to be dangerous. The mayor's not some street thug. He's powerful. He's got resources. I know, Olivia replied. But we've got something he doesn't. The truth. Jonathan picked up his bag, ready to go. Let's make sure he never gets the chance to hurt anyone again. Olivia nodded. Time to bring this city's king down. They moved out, ready to take the fight directly to the heart of the operation. And this time, there would be no turning back. The penthouse loomed over the city like a fortress of glass and steel. The bright lights of the skyline were muted through the tinted windows, casting the place in a cold, imposing glow. Olivia, Jonathan, Rodriguez, and Daryl stood just outside the entrance, hidden in the shadows of an alley. Tonight, everything would change. Olivia adjusted the earpiece, her eyes scanning the building once more. We're going in silent. No mistakes. Jonathan checked his watch. The mayor's meeting is scheduled in 30 minutes. We need to get in and out before he has time to react. Rodriguez gave her a hard look. And if things go sideways? Olivia's gaze was steady. Then we make sure the truth gets out. No matter what. She motioned toward the door, and they moved in unison, slipping through the back entrance. They used the security card Cain had gotten for them to bypass the elevator and head straight for the penthouse's private elevator shaft. No one would expect them to come from above, and that gave them the advantage. As they ascended the building, Olivia's mind was sharp, focusing on every possible detail. The mayor had been playing this city for far too long, and now it was time for him to answer. The elevator doors slid open, and they stepped into a lavish hallway, dimly lit with sleek modern art hanging on the walls. The penthouse itself was at the end of the hall. Olivia felt the adrenaline surge through her veins. This was it. Jonathan held up his hand, signaling for them to stop. He peeked around the corner. We're clear. Let's move. Olivia led the way, her steps quiet but confident. They reached the door without incident. She pulled out a small device, carefully placing it against the lock. Within seconds, the lock clicked open. Inside, the penthouse was even grander than Olivia had imagined. Expensive furniture, soft lighting, and walls lined with bookshelves and intricate decor filled the room. But it wasn't the luxury that held her attention. It was the three men sitting around the glass table at the center of the room. At the head of the table sat Mayor William Hayes, his sharp eyes flicking to the door as the team entered. Well, well, he said with a cold smile. I wasn't expecting company. Olivia stepped forward, her hand resting on her gun, her voice steady. You're under arrest, Mayor Hayes. For corruption, conspiracy, and the murder of anyone who got in your way. He leaned back in his chair, unfazed. You think you can just walk in here and stop me? I built this city. You can't tear it down with a few bullets and threats. Rodriguez stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. We don't need bullets, Hayes. We have proof, the documents, the money trails. You're finished. The two other men in the room, both well-dressed and with calculating expressions, stood up. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered figure, eyed Olivia. You're making a mistake, Agent. You think you can beat us, but you don't have the full picture. You're already too late. The other man, shorter with a hardened face, reached for his coat. You should have stayed out of this, Carter. You've poked the hornet's nest, and now we're coming for you. Before Olivia could respond, a sudden click echoed through the room. She spun toward the sound. The tall man had drawn a gun, aiming it directly at her. You're not getting out of here alive, he snarled. Olivia didn't hesitate. She reached for her gun and fired in one fluid motion. Bang! The man dropped to the floor with a thud, the gun slipping from his fingers. Enough! Mayor Hayes shouted, his voice tight with fury. He slammed his palm against the table. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Carter. This isn't over. Olivia stepped forward, her gun aimed straight at him. It is now. Rodriguez grabbed the second man by the collar and shoved him back against the wall. You talk, or you'll end up just like your friend here. Hayes' lips twisted into a smug grin. You think I'm scared? You think I haven't planned for this? You think I didn't know you'd come for me? Jonathan stepped up, holding up the flash drive Cain had given them. We have everything we need. We've got proof of your dealings, your payoffs, your dirty work. The whole city's about to see who you really are. For the first time, something flickered behind the mayor's eyes, fear. He stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. You can't. You won't. But Olivia was already moving. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device, pressing it into the table. The room went quiet as the hidden camera kicked on. You're going to confess, Hayes, she said coldly. Right now. Every deal you've made. Every crime you've committed. And when you're done, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. Mayor Hayes' face contorted with rage. You think this is going to stop me? Do you think anyone will believe you? Jonathan stepped forward, his eyes hard. They'll believe us because we have proof. He nodded at Olivia, signaling her to press play. The sound of a video filled the room. The camera had captured everything. Secret meetings, payments, even conversations Hayes had with criminal leaders. His own voice echoed through the room, making his arrogance sound like a dying gasp. You're done? Hayes, Olivia said, watching his face fall as he listened to his own incriminating words. The city belongs to the people now. Not you. Not your puppet strings. You're done. He trembled, his expression cracking. You have no idea what you've unleashed. Olivia leaned in, her voice a low whisper. I'm not afraid of you, and neither are the people you've hurt. For a moment, Hayes said nothing, the weight of his defeat pressing down on him. Then, with a final sneer, he muttered, This isn't over. Olivia didn't respond. Instead, she nodded to Jonathan. He stepped forward and slapped the handcuffs on Hayes, pulling him to his feet. It's over, Mayor, Jonathan said with finality. As they led him out of the penthouse, Olivia stood there for a moment longer, taking in the gravity of what had just happened. The mayor was arrested. The city was free. But something about Hayes' last words haunted her. He had warned her. Who was he really afraid of? And just as she thought about this, her phone buzzed. A message from Cain. You haven't won yet. There's still more to this. Keep your guard up. Her blood ran cold. The handcuffs clicked shut around Mayor Hayes' wrists, but Olivia couldn't shake the unease that gnawed at her. She watched as Jonathan and Rodriguez guided him out of the penthouse, each step closer to a long-awaited justice. Hayes had been the face of corruption in the city, and now that face was finally getting what it deserved. But still, that lingering message from Cain haunted her. You haven't won yet. There's still more to this. Keep your guard up. Her mind raced as she processed the words. Who could be behind all of this? Hayes wasn't acting like someone who had lost everything. He still had that look in his eyes, the one that screamed he was part of something much bigger. Once Hayes was escorted out of the penthouse, Olivia walked to the window and looked down at the city below. The skyline was beautiful, peaceful, as if the city hadn't been living under a shadow for so long. But deep inside, she knew the darkness hadn't been fully eradicated. Jonathan joined her at the window, sensing her thoughts. "What's going through your mind?" Olivia turned toward him. "There's something more here." Hayes wasn't acting like a man who's lost everything. He's connected to something else. Someone else? "I can feel it." Jonathan frowned, then nodded. "You really think someone else is pulling the strings?" "I know it." Olivia's voice was firm. Cain was right about one thing. This isn't over. And whoever's behind all of this, they're not going to go down without a fight. Rodriguez and Daryl stepped into the room. Daryl looked like he'd seen a ghost, his face pale, his eyes wide. "Liv, you're not going to like this." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Rodriguez handed her a phone, showing her an image of the news. The headline was glaring. "Breaking, Mayor arrested. But who's really pulling the strings?" The image showed Hayes being led out of the penthouse, but there was something odd in the background. A shadowy figure was visible in the far corner of the photo, standing just outside the building. Someone wearing a dark hood, almost blending in with the shadows. "I don't like it either," Rodriguez said, his voice tight. "That person. They were there, watching everything. But no one saw them leave. It's like they've been hiding in plain sight." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. "We've been set up." The team quickly reassembled in their safe house, piecing together the disturbing evidence they had. They still had the flash drive with the mayor's confession, proof that would send him to prison for life. But something told Olivia that the mayor's capture wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new game. "We need to figure out who that figure was," Jonathan said, rubbing his temples. Someone had to have been watching. Maybe someone inside the operation. But who? Cain's warning echoed in Olivia's mind. "Keep your guard up." He had told her there was more to this. But what did he mean? "We need to follow the money trail," Olivia said, her voice sharp. "If Hayes was just a puppet, then we need to find out who's really been pulling the strings. We go back to the financial records and work backwards. Start with the shell companies." Rodriguez looked at the laptop in front of him. "We've already gone through those. Every shell company, every transaction. It all led back to Hayes." Olivia shook her head. "No, something's wrong. I'm missing something." Daryl sat on the edge of the table, running his fingers through his hair. "Maybe we need to dig deeper. What if someone on the inside is helping them cover their tracks?" Olivia's eyes flicked toward him. "Someone inside the department?" Jonathan froze, his face suddenly pale. "You don't mean—" "I do," Olivia said. "Someone who's been playing both sides. A cop. Someone who's been covering Hayes all along." Rodriguez cursed under his breath. "We're talking about an inside job. Someone who has the mayor's back even now." The implications were chilling. Someone inside the system had been working alongside the mayor, manipulating the very people who were supposed to be investigating him. That meant the fight wasn't over. It was only getting started. The next few days were a whirlwind. Olivia, Jonathan, Rodriguez, and Daryl spent every waking moment going through files, tapping into confidential police data, and reaching out to their few trusted sources. They worked tirelessly, even at the risk of exposing their operation. They needed to find out who was protecting the mayor, and more importantly, who would benefit from him staying in power. The trail led them to one name, Captain Russell. Olivia's eyes widened when she saw it. "I've been so focused on the big players, I didn't see it." Rodriguez looked up from his laptop, confused. "What do you mean?" "Russell," Olivia said. "He's been close to the mayor. Too close." She tapped a few keys on the laptop, pulling up Russell's background. "He's been in charge of managing the city's investigations for years, and yet, he always turned a blind eye when it came to Hayes." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "You think he's been playing us this whole time?" Olivia's expression hardened. "I think he's been playing everyone. They didn't waste any time." Olivia, Jonathan, Rodriguez, and Daryl carefully planned their next move. They knew Russell had the power to make their investigation go dark, and they couldn't afford to let that happen. If he was part of the corruption, then he needed to be exposed. The night of the confrontation, Olivia stood in the shadows of the precinct, waiting. Are we sure this is the right move? Daryl asked, glancing nervously around. Olivia didn't respond immediately. Her thoughts were sharp, laser-focused on the task ahead. Russell has connections in all the right places. If he's been protecting Hayes, he's going to try and shut us down. We need to make sure we have the upper hand. Rodriguez checked his watch. He's about to leave for the night. Olivia nodded, stepping forward. Let's go. They moved quickly through the precinct, avoiding cameras and keeping to the shadows. The doors to Russell's office were ahead. When they reached it, Olivia nodded to Jonathan. He kicked open the door without a sound. Russell was sitting at his desk, reading through papers. The moment he saw them, he stood up, his face a mask of surprise. What is this? Olivia didn't waste time. You're under arrest, Captain Russell, for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and aiding and abetting a criminal operation. Russell's eyes narrowed, but he didn't flinch. You think you can just walk in here and arrest me? Olivia's voice was ice-cold. I don't think. I know. Jonathan stepped forward, the evidence in his hands. We've got everything, Russell. Your connections to Hayes, the money laundering, the murders. It's all here. And now we're taking you down. Russell smirked. You think you've won? You've only scratched the surface. There's much more to this. Much more. Olivia's grip on her gun tightened. I'm done listening to your threats. It's over. For the first time, a flicker of fear crossed Russell's face. But it was too late. The truth had already come for him. Olivia watched as they cuffed him, taking him out of the office. The weight of everything that had led them here, the corruption, the lies, the hidden enemies, finally began to sink in. But just before the door closed, Russell turned back to her, his voice low and ominous. You have no idea what's coming next. Olivia met his gaze, unwavering. I think I do, she said quietly. And I'm ready.